right, hello everybody. Welcome to Slam, the podcast that reviews every single DC superhero ever created. I'm your co-host Mike Allen. As always, I'm joined by
Joshua Mervell, and today we are going to be taking a look at the origin history of the character Johnny Thunder.
That's right. So this is I don't know too much about Johnny Thunder. I know a little bit more now that we've done this episode, but I mostly know him from his appearances in All-Star Squadron and a few of the Justice Society comics that I've read. What about you, Josh? Did you know anything about Johnny Thunder before this episode?
No, I don't think I've ever heard of this character before.
Okay.
So brand
again,
new for me.
For those that don't know, this podcast is not really about researching and educating people about these characters. It's more kind of just reviewing the comics that they first appeared in to kind of see the evolution of the character. But as we've talked about before, DC tends to reuse the same names and characters over time. They kind of reboot them. These three versions of these characters are almost completely different from each other. I will briefly say, so Johnny Thunder, or Johnny Thunderbolt as he was originally called, was a member of the Justice Society. That's kind of one of the main reasons we're doing him. There's a version called Johnny Thunder we're going to talk about that I barely knew about until this episode. And then there's, I believe it's pronounced Johnny Thunder. Or is it Jonni Thunder?
I think it's Johnny.
Okay, Johnny.
And it's spelt Onni.
Yes, and that's a woman, a female detective from the 1980s. And then if you go beyond this time period, there's other versions of the characters that I will quickly mention as we go along. I won't mention them yet because I don't have Wikipedia open yet. But anyway, so we also didn't talk about who would like to talk about what. So which comic would you like to do, Josh? You can pick one out of the three. How about that?
Honestly, for me, it doesn't matter. Maybe you can handle the first one so you can kind of talk about the history of it, and then I can jump into like the second and third or whatever. Right.
Okay, so what I'll say is, what I know about Johnny Thunder is that he was basically kind of the comic relief of the Justice Society, and he had he has a thunderbolt, or basically a genie that can do anything that he wishes it to do. And the character was kind of forgotten about after the Golden Age, but what's his name? Grant Morrison brought back a version of him, but he called him, where is the other version? Joaquin Thunder. That's the one I was thinking about. So he was created in The Flash, Volume 2, number 134 in February 1998. So a black teenager who has the same or similar Thunderbolt as Johnny Thunder, but this is the original. But the weird thing about this first story is there's no Thunderbolt, which really confused me, but I looked it up later and we'll explain that as we go. But basically, we're given the backstory of Johnny Thunder's parents first, Simon B. Thunder and Mildred Thunder.
Real quick before we jump in, it's so strange that you mention that he's known for being the comedic relief and that his powers come from a genie?
Yes.
Because that's absent from all of the comics we've talked about.
That's
so it's
very
so
confusing.
Strange that that's what this character is known for, but it has nothing to do with any of the character's origins.
No.
From what we can see.
No. Yeah, we'll talk about that later, but as we go. Yeah. But basically, Johnny Thunderbolt, so we're introduced to his parents. We're introduced to Johnny Thunder as a baby. And this is a very weird origin story. He is kidnapped by people from a fictional country called... what is it here?
It's...
Badnesia. It's a fictional Asian island, I believe. And he's kidnapped and he's kept there for many years. And we see... This is again, a key part of his backstory is we see them... kind of performing rituals with him, and we see them with the actual one of the magic words is say you, CEI-U, say you. That is actually the magic word that Johnny Thunder uses to call his genie when the genie is finally revealed later on. And so again, we follow Johnny Thunder as he's been kidnapped. He eventually makes his way onto a boat, gets rescued by Americans, sent back home. And then when he gets back home, there's all kinds of weird things that happen. Like we see that there's this gigantic torrential rain that comes and affects all the houses in the neighborhood except for Johnny Thunder's parents. And then we see him growing up, and then eventually he gets a job as a window washer. And what he doesn't realize is that in the time that he spent on the island, he gained these magical powers. And so now he can basically do whatever he wants. He just doesn't quite realize it yet. So, for example, he's at work, and one of his workers starts to fall off the building. Mm-hmm. He's going to help this guy, and then someone else is like, "Here, you can't rush through the store like that." And he's like, "Go jump at a duck," which I guess was an insult back in the 1940s. Right. And so you see a lightning bolt come down, and then all of a sudden there's a duck in front of that guy, right? Or no, the duck was already there. But now the guy's just moved.
He's screaming at the duck now, I guess.
Boo, yeah. So then anyway, so in the time it takes him to run, this guy's still falling from this 2-story building. He's been falling for 5 minutes. So then Johnny Thunder looks down and he goes, "Oh my gosh, stop." And then all of a sudden a bolt of lightning comes out of the air, and then the guy just kind of freezes in the air. It's kind of a poorly drawn panel because it looks like he's just drawn onto the window, but he's hanging in the air. And the next panel we see that he's floating above the ground. And then eventually he comes down because Johnny Thunder kind of orders him to, but he doesn't quite realize what's going on yet, right? Mm-hmm. So then later on, they give him a reward for saving the life of the employee. And, what's the reward again? It is, it's a medal.
Right.
Right? And so then what happens is that these guys are actually after him, I believe, right? They're trying to kidnap him to take him back.
Right, because they gave him the powers so they can use him for evil, I guess. So they're trying to kidnap him back. And
so then, so basically, they're chasing after him, and then he basically stands up on a table and he says, "Scram, fade, blow away." And then the next thing you know, we see this cloud of smoke blowing them all away. They smash through a window and disappear. And then this guy says, "Mr. Thunder, we've had enough of your pranks. You've wrecked the store which befriended you. You're fired." So he loses his job. "I was just trying to protect myself. Get out." And then he goes, "Do you call that justice?" And guess what, folks? That's the end of the story. And then at the bottom, it says, there's a little caption. It says, "Just an ordinary guy trying to lead an ordinary life. And this has to happen to him. How can Johnny learn to master the terrible powers he possesses?" See the next issue of Flash Comics. And that's the end. Before I say anything, I did do some research, which I forwarded in the email. And the genie does eventually show up in I think it's Flash Comics number 11. We finally see the genie appear, and then he appears again later in the story. And then I believe it's issue 20 that he finally gets full control of the genie by calling him and saying, "Say you." So that's kind of the version that I know. I just didn't realize it took so long for the character to evolve. So if you read the history of the character, it implies that he didn't realize the genie was doing all of this magic. So I don't know if that was planned by the writers or if it was just something that developed as the story went on. So that's all I'm going to say about that. But first, Josh, let's get your first impression of this story.
No wonder this character never stuck. I mean, the origin is so flimsy and convoluted. Why did they have to make it so they kidnapped the baby and then brought him to another country and then did this ritual and they dyed the baby brown to hide it? It's just not great. They could have just made it where this kid stumbles upon a lamp or something and then rubs it, and then now the genie belongs to him. So this
100%,
this evil group who is looking for the lamp now needs the kid because the genie is now attached to the kid instead of the lamp. Boom, your story is very solid, and you could just jump right into the shenanigans of him learning that he has these powers. But most of this is just this weird, convoluted way to get this baby from America to this made-up country, give him these powers, send him back, and then try and teach us how he's lived his life up until this point, and then he's now just discovering that he has these powers as an adult years later. And then And then because most of the story is kind of like building this strange backstory, I feel like the actual story of what's going on is so rushed that we don't even there's nothing really actually happening. Like it's just kind of goofy hijinks at work and not a real story. Even the antagonists kind of just show up and be like, "Hey, you got to come with us," and then he's like, "Nope," and like the last page, he just like whooshes them away. As like an afterthought, essentially, and then the story's done. So it's an interesting idea. It could definitely work. I think this comic is a downer. It really kind of sucks. Even the art isn't very strong. The storytelling is confusing at times. Like I don't understand what's even happening in the panels half the time. Even down to the point of like, he's like telling him to come down after the guy's frozen in midair, and then all of a sudden he's just on the ground on top of him. Like everything is just happening so quickly, and the storytelling through the pages just doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, not a huge fan of this one. Yeah, Origin's not great.
Well,
he has a monkey sidekick too that he tries to bring to America, and then he just like disappears. Because he makes it onto the train and then he's just gone. I know there's just so much going on, and it doesn't connect well for me.
No, and I will say that despite like you had mentioned that the character didn't really catch on. Well, he did last 91 issues of Flash comics, so he wasn't a complete failure. But he probably would have been completely forgotten if Roy Thomas had not revived him. Although, to be fair, did he appear in Justice League? I'm going to click around here on a secret website that I won't tell anyone about. And Justice League of America. Yes, he did pop up. So when they revived the Justice Society in the 60s, they did bring back this character. But yeah, he was never a lead character again. Like
yeah, I mean, like I'm sure that he's been in plenty of comics, but he's definitely not a memorable character. He's not somebody that anybody really talks about. Even me, who's somewhat familiar with comics and these like obscure characters, definitely not to the extent of some other people, but I've never heard of this character before. Right. But characters like Hawkman, who is a little bit more obscure, at least he's still relevant today. He's still in the comics. He's showing up now in the movies. Like this guy, I don't think he's ever like. Are they going to make a Thunder, like a Johnny Thunder movie?
Well, you know, it's funny. It's funny you should mention that because he has appeared in the TV show Stargirl.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, he has, and I believe he might have appeared in other media as well. But I'm not 100% positive. Again, we don't do research on this show.
Of course
so you'll never
not.
know. Yeah.
That should be our tagline.
Yeah. There you go.
DC
No
Comics
research.
History Podcast, where we don't do our research.
Yes. But, no, he appeared in a non-speaking role in Justice League Unlimited and live action in Stargirl. So
interesting.
He hasn't completely disappeared. But again, Stargirl is specifically a throwback show to kind of old Justice League or Justice Society characters, so that makes sense. But anyway, I do think that there's potential for Joaquin Thunder. I think it's a cool idea for a teenager to have access to a genie. So I think they could turn him to something bigger. They just haven't yet. But
yeah.
Anyway, so
and you know what? I think if they do turn him into something bigger, it's not going to be from this.
No,
it's got to be something new because this does not work.
No. This origin story doesn't work at all.
No.
I agree. No. So yeah, originally we were going to jump ahead a few decades, but before we do that, there's a stop off in the 1940s, 1948, and this was actually really hard to dig up because I kind of didn't realize what happened here. But so DC had All American Comics, which is where Green Lantern first appeared, but around number, I think it's 103, it changes to All American Western Comics, just like All-Star Comics changed to All-Star Western Comics. Yeah, superheroes by the 1950s had lost almost all their popularity and Westerns had taken over. So this is an example of one of the first of DC's big Western characters that sort of eclipse superheroes in popularity. And I wasn't originally going to even include it in this podcast, but then I found out something about it that I won't reveal just yet, and that is the reason we reviewed it. But would you like to do the honors with this comic, Josh, or do you want me to do it?
Sure, yeah, I can do this one.
There you go, Johnny Thunder.
Yeah, this one, like Mike was saying, in the All-American Comics book, and this one is just called Johnny Thunder. Mm-hmm. We start off with a bunch of cowboys kind of sitting around talking to each other, and they're complaining. They're supposed to be doing some sort of town meeting, and somebody's late for the meeting. So to buy some time, they do a shooting contest, and they also do a horse wrangling contest. What would you even call this? Like trying to wrangle this bucking horse that doesn't want to doesn't want to be tamed. So nobody can tame this horse. Everybody's kind of bad at shooting. There's a couple of things they constantly miss, and as they're shooting, they realize that there's somebody behind this wall where they're shooting, and out pops Johnny Thunder. This young guy, glasses, blonde hair. He's in this old-timey suit, and he looks very studious. We learn that he's a school teacher, and everybody kind of makes fun of him for being a school teacher because, quote, that's a woman's job. And the rest of them leave to go to their meeting. He jumps up onto this horse that everybody has trouble wrangling, and he's easily able to do this and wrangle the horse and kind of calm it down. And while on top of this bucking horse, he ropes a tree with a lasso, and he swings off and he shoots all of the cans that everybody missed with his pistol. So we kind of are revealed, the audience is revealed, that this guy not only is very studious and smart, but he's an action hero. One of the ladies at the schoolyard kind of comes up to him and is like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" Anyways, the guy that we've been waiting for, Jagger Bowen, he's arrived, and this town hall meeting is about to start. So he shows up. In this town hall meeting, they're all kind of talking about how there's this group of bandits that have been giving them trouble when going down this trail. One of the cowboys lost a bunch of cattle. The other one had to turn around. They all have these problems, and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do and how they could protect themselves. And Johnny speaks up and says, "If you guys are all having this trouble or this problem, team up and go together. And that'll double your chances of winning and taking care of these guys." Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. They all ride off together, and Johnny jumps up onto Black Lightning, this horse that was giving everybody trouble. He rides on down kind of after them and chases. He learns that these bandits are throwing fiery tumbleweeds at the group of the people, the cowboys from the town. So he comes up with an interesting idea where he puts this big log into the lake, and he shoots some holes into it to essentially make a giant log straw to pour water down onto the fire. And while he's kind of distracted doing this, the bandits show up and tie him up. He easily shoots the rope and kind of escapes and punches all of these guys out, easily takes care of them. And he rides back to town and goes back to work. We don't really get much. Oh, sorry. He does kind of get praise from the other townsfolk as Johnny Thunder because he's putting on this disguise, which is just putting ash or charcoal in his hair,
right?
So he looks a little bit different, I guess. And he shows back up in town. He washes his hair and he puts on his school uniform, and he shows up and nobody realizes that it's him, and we're led to believe that he's this kind of secret hero of this western town now. It's definitely a better origin for a character, I think. Him not having powers is very interesting. It doesn't really feel like the same character. It feels like... I don't know.
To be fair, there's no connection. Like, there's absolutely no... It's just the same name, right? They
right,
just reuse the same,
I assumed that maybe there was some sort of connection because he is a blonde-haired, like, blonde, curly-haired kid. And he does put on, like, the black ash... Like, he dyes his hair, essentially, as a disguise, just like the origin. So I thought maybe they're like it's supposed to be some sort of like in some way tied in, and I assume since we're reading it on the podcast, there's some sort of connection. But
no, it's just the name. That's the thing.
Wow.
Is like
okay.
Yeah. So and again, they could have called this character anything. They could have called him Bill Lightning, but they chose Jonni Thunder. Who knows why? Maybe just because people already knew the name. But yeah, so he essentially replaces the other version, and he has no connection to him. And maybe we're just seeing it as a reboot or reuse because we're used to it. But maybe at the time it was just like, oh, this name was laying around, no one was using it, so we're going to use it, you know?
Interesting.
But here's the thing about this. The reason I chose to do it is because of the art. I know that the characters are a little bit cartoony, a little bit exaggerated, but this art is by Alex Toth, and he's actually my all-time, probably my second favorite superhero artist.
Wow.
This is obviously early Toth. This is 1948, but he went on to not only be respected as one of the greatest artists in the industry, but he actually designed all of the characters for Super Friends, created all the model sheets.
Oh, wow.
So like those famous designs of Batman and Wonder Woman and Superman that everyone's familiar with, he actually designed those. He worked for Hanna-Barbera. He did like a whole bunch of different cartoons. And he was also notoriously a complete asshole. Even like people that are known as assholes think he's an asshole, but whatever. He probably had a huge ego. But the good thing about that was that no one was able to push him around because he had so much power and so much respect. But yeah, like if you ever get a chance, just Google Alex Toth. Even if you just do Alex Toth Zorro, that's one of his best works. Hot Wheels, Westerns. Now, as far as superhero work, it was scattered, but there is a lot of it. Like, he would just show up at random times and do, like, he did one issue of X-Men with, I think Jack Kirby inked him, but it was, like, X-Men number 12. He did, like, a couple random Batman stories, including up until, like, much later in his career. He did a random issue of Green Lantern. He did a random issue of Superman in the 80s. So he was always around, but... you just look up his what's it called, bibliography, and you can dig up all of his stuff. But the one weird thing about him is that he had no use for any type of story that was anything more than, I guess, what at the time you would call a boy's adventure story. Like, he didn't care about realism. He didn't care about, where superheroes kind of started to evolve in the 80s. He liked things the way they were when he started, right? Like superhero stories for kids, that's all he cared about. So, and that's his thing. But anyway, yeah. So that's the main thing I took away from this, is how incredible the art was.
The art is great. I feel like the inking is very heavy. I'm not sure. It could also be the scans that we've got. It's just like not great, and it feels darker than normal, but... No,
I think it's just the way, honestly, like, these scans are clearly just straight off the page, and I think it's just the way that it was done for the cheap paper at the time. It was just inked that way, just to suit that...
Gotcha.
That cheap paper, the pulp paper.
But the storytelling in, like, everything is very clear in the layouts and everything. Way more clear than in the first one.
Right.
And I think more interesting at times than, or maybe on par with the next issue that we're going to be talking about. But yeah, that's super interesting. I'll definitely have to take a look at
his stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, even if you just, like, and again, I know that this is an audio podcast, but and I hope you can find an issue of All American Comics 100 somewhere. But even just his use of, like, his composition is flawless. Like, everything is in its perfect place. He's using, like, silhouettes in his panels. He's using multiple panels within panels to tell the story. Like, when the people are trying to wrangle the horse, there's like 3 of the same horse in one panel, right? So that's really 3 panels within one panel. There's like these complex compositions of like a tree branches in the foreground and like a little pot creating like depth, and figures in the background, and then more figures in the background, and then mountains in the background, and like the texture of the stones on like the fence, and it's just incredible. Like, to me, I could just stare at this art for hours. He's just such a good artist. Again, the characters are more exaggerated than his later work. It's more cartoony, but as long as you can kind of accept that style, I think it's incredible.
And I think in particular too, his artwork and anatomy with the horse is unbelievably good. Horses are extremely complex and hard to draw. I've had to animate horses in 3D and not have to draw them, and even posing them out in a realistic way is very difficult. So the fact that somebody can draw them in a stylized way but still have the anatomy so spot on is amazing, and a testament to their ability. So that as well, I think, is just fantastic.
Right.
Yeah.
And I also want to say the scene of him stopping the fire is incredible. You've got the Golden Age style of panel designs was usually the smaller, 6 to 9 panels per page. But in this one page, he's got this gigantic, it's kind of like a upside down J shape, well, whatever, half a T, how you want to call it, but showing this huge gorge with the smoke coming out and the horse sleeping over it. And then the next page is another giant panel of him diverting some water onto the fire to put it out. And it's just, it's not something you typically see in a Golden Age comic. And also, on the page 9 of the story, you see this, again, he's riding his horse, and then we see the silhouette of the other horse riders kind of in the foreground. And look at the use of color with like those beautiful sunset yellows and oranges. Again, not something you typically see in a Golden Age comic. And so when you look at the first Johnny Thunder story, that's kind of typical Golden Age art. And this to me is like the sophisticated Golden Age art. Like, it still looks of its time, but it's making so much better use of the medium, I think. But anyway,
for sure.
Yeah.
I think the only ding against this one for me is the dialogue is cartoonishly bad. I really hate how the characters talk in it. It really feels like they wrote down every single like cowboy western hick saying possible, and they're like, okay, we have to fit every single one of these into the dialogue somewhere, so we can show that they're stupid southern dum-dums in comparison to Johnny. Right? Like, it feels like it's just pushed way too far, but definitely the strongest story and origin we're going to be talking about today with this character.
Well, first I will say the story is written by Robert Kanigher, who is one of the most prolific DC Comics writers. So he wrote Wonder Woman for like 20 years. He wrote the Flash, G.I. Combat, Metal Men. So he is, I mean, I guess you could say he's kind of a typical DC writer. He's very entertaining, but yes, he did certainly write for kids. And there's a lot of silly plot twists, right? You kind of just have to accept it. You either buy into it or you don't, But at least I know when I read one of his stories, it's going to be entertaining. But his dialogue can definitely get grating. I agree with you there. So, all right. So now we're going to talk about a character that I'd never, ever read before this week, and that's Jonni Thunder, a.k.a. Thunderbolt. This is the female detective version of Jonni Thunder. And I always wanted to read the series just because it looks so wacky. But basically, this is a combination of a hard-boiled detective with a superhero sci-fi kind of little bend. But I didn't realize, because here's the thing, this is created by Roy and Dan Thomas with Dick Giordano on art. Dick Giordano is kind of more famous for being inker, teamed up with Neil Adams, but he was like a prominent DC artist in the 70s and 80s, and he was also their, I think, vice president. So he was one of the main creative people at the company for a long time. And I did not expect this to be this well written, to be honest. But it's essentially written like a hard-boiled detective or film noir story, like something Raymond Chandler would have done, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows that. But maybe not as good. But it is refreshing because Roy Thomas is known for his just overwriting and honestly, I'm sorry, but it's terrible dialogue usually. Like, try and read an issue of All-Star Squadron. Even go back to his more popular stuff on Avengers. I find it unreadable. But here, he's clearly trying to emulate the author who referenced on the opening page of #1, Raymond Chandler, in the very first little caption there. So, but he does an excellent job. Like, this is an entertaining read, It just goes to show sometimes sometimes when you do a parody or a pastiche, it actually can make your writing better, and here it completely works. We're introduced to a character named Jonni Thunder, and she's narrating the story. She comes home and she finds a dead body in her office. And of course, even though I just read this last week, I already forget who it was.
He was a client.
Yes.
He was a potential client. He shows up, and her secretary told him to wait in her office until she got back. And when she does show up, she opens the door to a dead body.
Right. And then later on, the police come and they're investigating her office, and there's the banter between the two, and we get a little flash of her father, Jim Thunder, right?
Yeah, who's an ex-cop.
Right.
Who one of the police officers know and kind of knows that he was, like, discharged from the force.
And she's facing the typical misogyny that, characters in stories like this face. And then we find out that she is the chief suspect in this case now. And so then she, she goes home and she gets a mysterious phone call from someone that says, La Brea Tar Pits, 20 minutes alone. And, we get the narration. I hang up wondering if I've just spoken with a killer or with a ground sloth in heat. Like that type of film noirish, hard-boiled.
It's fantastic.
I love it. Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Like, and so much of that is, like, woven into the story and what happens to her. Like, even down to, like, she gets into her car and the convertible top won't fold open, so she has no other choice but to drive it with the top down in the pouring rain to the museum. It's so wonderful. Yeah,
it's great.
And
you're right.
It's like it's written so well, and then
I know what you're talking about.
Ah, man, this next part in the story
let me just say, as I'm reading this, aren't you kind of thinking like, oh, this would make a good TV show, right?
Yeah.
Like, if they were to adapt this would be perfect. And then she comes home and she finds a giant robot spider on her desk. Like, who wrote this? Like, the producer of, the Superman movie that Kevin Smith, tried to help. Remember? Do you remember that famous story about the robot spider?
Yeah. Superman's
That's exactly what this
the giant robot.
The robot spider.
He's got to fight a polar bear.
I can't remember who that was, the producer. But anyway, so then she spends several pages trying to shoot this robot spider. It's not a giant robot spider. It's like the size of like a dog or something, right? A small dog. But anyway, so she spends a few pages fighting this robot spider, ends up jumping out the window, landing on the ground, still fighting it, ends up using her umbrella to poke one of its eyes out.
And it just explodes.
Yeah, and then it just explodes. And then we kind of jump right back into like the regular part of the story. The cops come back, they're talking about witnesses, blah, blah, blah. She ends up getting a little a vase of flowers, and with a little note on it that says, Johnny, knock 'em dead, kid, sunshine. Good old sunshine. Why is it always guys like him who know how to treat girls like me? So then he ends up, and we should point out this whole story takes place in L.A. So she ends up going to visit, who is this guy again? Oh, a guy named Slim Chance, who used to be an actor in old westerns, right?
Right, and I believe he's also famous for, like, yodeling, so he's, like, this big famous guy.
Right. And so she ends up talking to this guy and finding out... Oh, sorry, I missed a part of the story. It's about the statue, right? When does the statue come in? I don't even remember.
The statue comes in now. So
okay.
In between that and the spider, the cops, those two cops show back up, and they have this weird witness who's like a homeless guy in the street, and he says he was in the alleyway at the time, and that he didn't see anything, and he was asleep the whole time, so they don't believe her that she was fighting this robot. And it's revealed that this homeless guy is maybe the guy controlling the robot, because he like reveals that he has some sort of gadget underneath his shirt.
Right.
So this guy ends up calling her to talk about the origin of the statue and how it's connected to her father.
Right.
Which is also connected to the story about how her father was kicked off the force.
Mm-hmm.
So he starts telling this story about how these two men go to this like temple in Peru, and they steal this statue, and one of the men was like so greedy and like wanted the statue for himself that he murdered his partner that he went up there with the statue, and he brought it back down. He ended up getting caught by the police, and her father was the one to arrest him, and he went away to jail. And for some reason, before going to jail, he packaged up this statue and he sent it to her father for safekeeping. So the man that arrested him, he sent the statue to him, which is confusing to me why he did that. Maybe that's something that's going to be unraveled in the story to come. But so then we also learn that this is a treasured item that she has from her childhood, because she really loved the statue. So her father gave it to her and actually like turned it into a lamp for her. So she has this lamp at home. So she goes back home and she takes it out of storage, and I think she was originally going to go have it fixed up because it was broken for a little while, and she takes the lamp part off of it, and it's just the statue now. And she's supposed to meet this person somewhere to exchange it. I can't remember exactly why she's supposed to meet them there, but it turns out that it's the homeless man.
Yes.
Who was disguised as the guy that was disguised as the homeless man. He's there and confronts her. He pulls a gun on her and starts shooting at her. And she, in this planetarium, something weird happens with the telescope after he shoots it, and it starts like going on the fritz and exploding. And while she's holding the idol, she turns into this being of like pure lightning, and it's like her physical body drops, and essentially her soul in this electricity form stays behind as her body falls, and she's able to quickly stop this guy. As he's running away, he ends up slipping and falling off the building and dying. And she believes this is all a dream. She flies back to her body, and the two versions of her, like her astral electric form and her physical body, merge back into one as she realizes that it was not a dream, and the man did actually fall. And we're left on a bit of a cliffhanger there.
Right. Whoo, boy. So here's the
very
thing.
Interesting.
I definitely am going to keep reading. I'm going to finish this series. There's only 3 more issues, so I'm definitely going to finish it. I think we both agree the robot spider was the worst part of the story.
For sure. It feels so out of place.
Yes.
Even with the science fiction side of the idol and her turning into this being, it just does not fit the whole vibe of the story.
And also they spent so much time on it. It's like 5 pages, right? Like it really, like I'm going to count.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 pages. That's a waste. It doesn't feel... I feel like the science fiction side and the grounded PI like detective side don't mesh well. And I think that those two genres could be an interesting combination, but I feel like they don't do a great job of like combining them. It really does feel like just a noir that
is thrown into being a sci-fi at the end. Like, it's not the two of them combined. And I don't know exactly how they could have fixed this. Maybe instead of her dad being a cop, like, he's almost like an archaeologist and believes in this, like, science fiction stuff. So she's kind of like battling with her logical side and then wanting to believe her father's stories about all of these, like, these mystical items and things like that, and then, like, her two worlds combine. But it really just feels like two different stories that are, like, tacked onto each other.
100%, I agree.
So the sci-fi stuff for me doesn't work, but the noir stuff is fantastic, and I think written and drawn so well.
Yes, like, and we should, again, I don't even know if this has ever been reprinted, so I hope you can dig up a copy of this, but the art was printed on a process called flexograph, okay? And I'm not an expert on this, but as far as I know, instead of using metal plates for the color, they were plastic. And everybody hated this process except me, okay? I'm not saying it was good, but I'm just saying maybe it's because of nostalgia, but when you look at these scans, because this is taken directly from the comics page, you can see how garish the colors are, but there's something about it that I just like, because I associate it with the comics I read as a little kid, right?
Right.
And the art is great, and what I particularly like about it is it looks like 80s art, right? And so for once, we have an 80s comic that looks like an 80s comic, but it's actually well written, which is a rarity sometimes. Yeah. And it just reminds me how if there were comics like this that were this well written, I would just love to read them and reread them, because lately I've been having a hard time going through my old 80s comics. They're just, they're not as good as I remember them to be, but this is really good. And for example, there was a comic we reviewed on Flea Market Fantasy called Miss Tree, which was written by Max Allan Collins, who did The Road to Perdition, right? So this guy is an actual novelist who happened to also write comics, and so there are comics like this that you can read that are like old hard-boiled detective novels, and this one is successful at mimicking that. But then, like we said, it throws in the robot spider, it throws in the other elements which sort of work, because you kind of expect there to be some super heroic elements to this, and that's fine. I don't mind, like, the whole going to Peru and getting this statue, and I don't mind all that thrown in, but the superhero part of it with the Thunderbolt doesn't quite mesh with the film noir, but as the story goes on, they might make it work more. I don't know, but I just know that the film noir parts of this I absolutely loved.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. And again, now here's a separate conversation, but most of the comics that we read are digitally corrected and because a lot of times they're taking comics that are so old that they don't even have the original copies anymore. This is scanned right from the original, and this is supporting my new theory that I don't even know if they should bother recoloring old comics, because I understand that they were created for a primitive printing process, but going in and recoloring them is almost like colorizing a black and white movie. Like, what do you think about the idea of just taking the page as it appeared on the pulp paper and just putting that out as a hardcover? Like, what do you think about that? Would you want to read old comics like this? Because I think this looks great. Yeah,
I think that completely recolorizing it is not the way to go. If you're going to do it as like a digital scan of like a printed comic, I think retouching it up and trying to match the original look as best as possible is the way to go. Right. Because scanning it isn't always going to be correct. And then if you scan it one for one, even that scan is not going to be the same colors as the original. So, like, trying to match it digitally as best as possible to the original colors is a good idea. But completely recoloring it and doing it as if it were printed today, I'm not a huge fan of that.
Right.
Don't update it. Just try and recreate it as it originally was. However you choose to do that.
See, like, I can understand if, for example, there's several steps. First of all, there's the whole, what is that called? The dot system, whatever that's called. I should know this, but
I don't know what it's called.
There's a name for it, but I don't mind it Now, if you wanted to argue that, okay, that's just a byproduct of the primitive system they use, fine. But, like, for example, just take a typical page. Like, what page are you on right now? Yeah, Ben Day. That's what I thought. Yeah. I knew there was a day in there somewhere. What page are you on right now?
10, I'm looking at.
So, original page 10, okay? So, I'm going to go there right now.
Yeah.
Now, now look at her face. Now, obviously, you could keep the dots, but if you're going to get rid of them, it's very hard to mimic that skin color. But don't go in and add shading. Don't go in and add lighting. Just mimic that shade, you know? The hair color, match it. Some colorists are more creative than others, so I can... Yeah. I think they should... Go ahead.
I think that you should, if you're going to recolor it, you put the Ben-Day back in.
Well,
and
then,
you just clean it up as if it were, like, as it exactly was already.
Right,
just, like, recreate it on new paper as best as you can, I think is the way to go. Making that a solid color, her face, like that, just the skull, solid beige skin tone, it flattens it out way too much.
Right.
The reason why it was colored so simply is because there was added texture with the paper. There's added texture with the Ben-Day, with the printing process. So there's all of these reasons why the art looks like it does. Or else they would have added more detail and put all of this stuff in. But
exactly,
if you get rid of that process and try and recolorize it and don't change anything, it's just going to look flat and boring and just like, I don't know, you're not going to get that feeling. You're not going to get that depth that you would looking at an actual comic. Even this, like, just scanned in to the computer is way better.
Yeah, I agree.
Than it has reading a digital comic.
Right. And the thing, too, is that there are some recolorings that look good. Like, for example, I've got the trades from the 80s, like the greatest Superman stories ever told. I'm not sure who colored those, but they recreate the feel of the 1960s Superman, but there's no Ben-Day dots. It's just, there's no added lighting or anything, but it just looks amazing. It looks perfect. So I can understand if you want to go to that level, fine. But like you're just saying, ideally, this is how you would do it. You would just scan it and just do some correction or recreate the Ben-Day. Because, again, this kind of ties in with what we were saying about colorizing black and white films. Like, this art was created this way for a reason. It's kind of like, music from the 1960s, for at least the first half of the decade, was recorded in mono. It was mixed in mono. Now, you can go back and create stereo mixes, but there's something lost. And it took me 40 years of listening to the Beatles to realize, when I'm listening to the stereo mixes, I'm listening to the afterthought mix. The main mix was the mono, okay? And usually, when the Beatles, like, when they were mixing the mono, they were in the room, they were making sure everything sounded perfect. Then later, George Martin would go in and do the stereo mix, which they didn't even really care about. And so there are weird anomalies in the stereo mixes that don't exist in the mono mix. And the same goes for the Beach Boys. Brian Wilson was deaf in one ear. He mixed everything mono, and their music sounds better mono. And I think you can apply that logic to comics, where people want to go in and they want to add shadow and texture and all these weird colors that didn't exist at the time. And like we said, the artwork was created for the physical medium that it was printed on, and it should stay that way. So anyway, that's a little side note. But this is, I consider this like a hidden gem of the 80s. And we should point out the time period. This is February 1985. This is before Crisis, but it's when DC was already on a creative kind of resurgence. They were calling themselves the new DC, and they were introducing new characters and new concepts right before they wiped everything out with Crisis, which is kind of unfortunate, but it was kind of a mini creative resurgence. So if you go back and look at their characters at this time, even if you look at like their big characters, it was almost like there was mini revivals. Like Wonder Woman had just gotten Mindy Newell to take over as writing, and then before that, I think it was Dan Michigan, but Wonder Woman was doing great. Like, Superman was sort of rebooted by Marv Wolfman and Gil Kane, and all of their characters were experiencing a little bit of a bump, and then Crisis came in and kind of, in a way, it definitely revitalized the company, but it also kind of knock the legs out of that mini revival that was already kind of happening, you know. So yeah, definitely a product of its time, but everyone I think should check this out. It's a really cool concept.
Yeah. It's super interesting. It's a bummer that it doesn't mesh well, the two genres, for me at least. I don't know why it's still sticking with me. Mm-hmm. Because, like, I don't know why it doesn't work here, but it works for something like Indiana Jones. But I feel like it's also because in Raiders,
yeah,
you see him kind of dealing with the fact that these idols, these artifacts that are kind of revered for its religious beliefs, he's kind of like struggling, I guess, a little bit with it just being a relic, like it's just an item to him, and it's really more about the history and not about the significant or spiritual meaning. So by the end of the movie, when the Ark is opened and something magical literally happens, you believe it because he's been like, it's been a theme throughout, right? Because everything up until that point has been very real and down to earth. But when this magical thing happens, it doesn't feel out of place. Where here, it feels very strange and jarring.
Right.
Because we don't have time to kind of slowly get like introduced to these like mystical things being reality. Sure. So when you're making it so gritty and like down to earth, and then all of a sudden the spider robot shows up, you're like, what the hell is happening?
Yeah,
so
I agree.
I'm actually interested to see where this goes, and I might read more because I did enjoy the book.
Right.
It does have these weird moments, I think, for me that don't quite work. But I also want to point out, I love this first panel real quick with the thunder, and there's like the silhouette of the woman in the lightning and the rain.
Wow.
It's so great. And it's like you see the Hollywood sign in the background, and in the foreground we've got the coffee shop that she's walking by. It's great.
I agree.
So definitely the strangest story, I think, of all three, which is weird considering the other two stories that we read, but I did enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you thought this character was obscure, we got more obscure characters coming soon. But first, in our next episode, we're going to cover the Spectre, who, you know, has been around forever. He's, you know, we don't need to say anymore. He's a great character. Hopefully, we're going to be joined by Paul Carbonaro again. So he was a great guest last time, so we're going to have him on again. And then in our next episode of Taped Crusaders, we're going to be reviewing the 1970s TV movie Doctor Strange. So be sure to check that out.
Very excited for that.
Yes, and Josh, you can take it from here.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast. Please let us know what you guys think about the comics we're talking about, the characters, the movie sometimes. You can keep in contact with us on our website at thecomicbooksyndicate.com, or you can check us out on Facebook or YouTube. Leave us a review or just like some comments or whatever you guys think about whatever we're talking about. Keep in touch and keep that comics conversation going.
That's right, and until next time, see you later.